Ah, the Galactic Confederation's annual war games. A spectacle of epic proportions where the brightest military minds from across the cosmos gather to showcase their strategic prowess. Picture, if you will, a grand amphitheatre filled with beings of all shapes, sizes, and varying degrees of tentacleness. The air thrums with excitement, punctuated by the occasional squelch of a gelatinous observer settling into their seat. At the centre of it all stands Admiral Zilvorp, his 7 eye stalks swivelling with barely contained anticipation. The venerable Xyrillian commander's iridescent scales shimmer under the harsh spotlights as he addresses the assembled crowd, his voice booming through the translator devices. Esteemed colleagues, honoured guests, and humans. He pauses, casting a weary glance at the small group of pink-skinned bipeds huddled in the corner. Welcome to the 527th Galactic War Simulation. The crowd erupts in a cacophony of cheers, whistles, and what can only be described as the sonic equivalent of a ticklish Blorxian slug. Admiral Zilvorp raises all 4 of his upper appendages, calling for silence. As you know, this year's simulation is our most ambitious yet. We've painstakingly crafted a scenario that spans an entire decade of interstellar conflict, complete with resource management, diplomatic manoeuvring, and of course the occasional supernova or two. He chuckles at his own joke, a sound reminiscent of gravel in a blender. The holographic display behind him flickers to life, revealing a stunningly detailed map of the simulated galaxy. Gasps of awe ripple through the audience as countless star systems blink into existence. Now, before we begin, I must address the elephant in the room. The Admiral's eye stalks swivel towards the human contingent. As per the Galactic Inclusion Act of 2387, we are required to allow representatives from all sentient species to participate. This year, that includes our charming Deathworlder friends from Earth. A collective groan echoes through the amphitheatre, punctuated by the distinctive sound of a Valaxian face-palming with all 8 of its hands. Yes, I know, Zilvorp continues, his tone dripping with barely concealed disdain. But let us remember, fellow galactic citizens, that diversity is our strength. And who knows, perhaps our human guests will surprise us with their unique perspective. Scattered laughter ripples through the crowd, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of someone poorly attempting to stifle a snort. All eyes and various sensory organs turn to the source, a lanky human cadet with a mop of unruly red hair. Something amusing, cadet? The Admiral's voice trails off, realizing he never bothered to learn the human's name. The cadet straightens up, fighting to keep a straight face. Jenkins, sir. Cadet Zoe Jenkins. And no, nothing amusing at all. Just a bit of cosmic dust in my respiratory system, you understand. Admiral Zilvorp's eye stalks narrow suspiciously, but he decides to let it slide. Very well, Cadet Jenkins. Now, as I was saying— Excuse me, Admiral, another human voice pipes up, this one belonging to a stocky, dark-skinned cadet with a neatly trimmed beard. Cadet Marcus Chen here. I was wondering if you could clarify something about the simulation parameters. The Admiral's scales flare in annoyance, but he forces himself to respond cordially. Yes, Cadet Chen. What is it? Well, sir, Chen begins, his tone perfectly respectful, yet somehow laced with an undercurrent of mischief. I couldn't help but notice that the simulation is set to run for 10 galactic standard years. That's quite a long time, isn't it? I mean, by human standards, we could fight several wars in that time span. A ripple of amusement courses through the human group, while the rest of the audience exchanges puzzled glances. Admiral Zilvorp's voice takes on a patronizing tone. Cadet Chen, I assure you that 10 years is barely enough time to properly assess the full scope of interstellar conflict. Why? The Great Andromeda Skirmish of 2156 lasted for over 3 centuries. Of course, sir, Chen replies, nodding solemnly. My apologies for the interruption. Please, do continue. The Admiral eyes the humans suspiciously for a moment before clearing his throat, or the Xyrillian equivalent thereof, and addressing the crowd once more. Now, if there are no further interruptions, let us begin the simulation. Teams, please take your positions at your designated command stations. As the various alien species shuffle towards their elaborate control panels, the humans huddle together for a quick powwow. "All right, gang," whispers Cadet Jenkins, a mischievous glint in her eye. "You know the drill. Operation Shock and Awe is a go. Let's show these Xenos what Earth's finest can do." The small group breaks apart, each cadet taking their place at a surprisingly simple terminal. The contrast between their modest setup and the flashy, over-engineered stations of their alien counterparts is stark. Admiral Zilvorp's voice booms once more. "Commanders, synchronize your temporal matrices. The simulation will commence in 3, 2, 1, begin!" A flurry of activity erupts across the amphitheatre as holographic displays spring to life, filling the air with a dazzling array of colours and data streams. The alien teams frantically begin inputting commands, their appendages flying over complex control surfaces. Meanwhile, at the human station, an eerie calm prevails. The cadets appear to be lounging? Yes, lounging is definitely the word. Cadet Jenkins has her feet propped up on the console, idly tapping at a datapad. Cadet Chen appears to be... Is he napping? As the first simulated year passes, Admiral Zilvorp can't help but notice the lack of activity from the human contingent. His curiosity gets the better of him, and he slinks over to their station. "Cadets!" he hisses, trying to keep his voice low to avoid disturbing the other teams. "Why aren't you participating? This is a complex simulation that requires constant attention and—" "Oh, we're participating, Admiral," Jenkins interrupts, not bothering to look up from her datapad. "In fact, we're making excellent progress." "Progress?" Zilvorp sputters, his eye stalks quivering with indignation. "But you've barely touched your controls." Chen cracks open one eye, a lazy grin spreading across his face. "Sometimes, sir, the best course of action is inaction. You'd be surprised how many problems solve themselves if you just let them." The Admiral's scales flush a deep purple, a sure sign of rising blood pressure in Xyrillians. "This is preposterous. You can't possibly expect to achieve anything by just sitting there." Jenkins finally looks up, fixing the Admiral with a steady gaze. "With all due respect, sir, maybe you should check the current simulation status. I think you'll find it illuminating." Muttering under his breath about the audacity of Deathworlders, Zilvorp storms back to the central command station. He pulls up the main display, fully expecting to see the humans lagging far behind the other teams. What he sees, instead, nearly causes all 7 of his eye stalks to pop out of their sockets. The holographic galaxy map is a sea of green, the colour designated for human-controlled territory. In just under 2 simulated years, the Earth forces have expanded across nearly a third of the galaxy, dwarfing the progress of all other teams combined. This is impossible!" Zilvorp bellows, drawing the attention of the entire amphitheatre. "There must be some mistake, some glitch in the system." As if on cue, a triumphant cheer erupts from the human station. The cadets are high-fiving each other, a curious Earth custom that still baffles most of the galactic community, and wearing grins that can only be described as insufferably smug. "Admiral," calls out Cadet Jenkins, her voice dripping with faux innocence, "I believe we've completed the simulation objective. Shall we call it a day?" The amphitheater erupts into chaos. Alien commanders rush to their stations, frantically trying to understand how they've been so thoroughly outmaneuvered. Observers chitter and buzz in a mixture of shock, disbelief, and, in some cases, grudging admiration. Admiral Zilvorp, his scales now a sickly shade of green, stumbles towards the human station. "How?" he croaks, all pretense of composure abandoned. "How did you possibly accomplish this in less than 2 simulated years?" Cadet Chen stretches lazily, cracking his knuckles in a way that makes several nearby aliens wince. "Well, Admiral, it's quite simple, really. We noticed a few, let's call them inefficiencies, in the simulation parameters." "Inefficiencies?" the Admiral repeats, his voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, yes," Jenkins chimes in, her tone reminiscent of a teacher explaining a simple concept to a particularly dense student. "You see, your simulation was built on the assumption that interstellar warfare would progress at a, shall we say, leisurely pace. But we humans have a saying, time is of the essence." Chen nods sagely. "Indeed. While the other teams were meticulously planning decade-long campaigns, we decided to take a more direct approach." "Direct?" Zilvorp's eye stalks droop in confusion. "Blitzkrieg, sir," Jenkins says with a wink. "Lightning war. We analysed the initial data, identified key strategic points, and launched a series of rapid, coordinated strikes across multiple fronts simultaneously." But that's not how interstellar warfare is conducted," the Admiral sputters. "There are protocols, traditions." "With all due respect, Admiral," Chen interjects, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "in real warfare, the only tradition that matters is victory. We simply applied the lessons learned from thousands of years of human conflict to your simulation." Jenkins picks up the thread. "We leveraged our species' unique adaptability and capacity for rapid decision-making. While other teams were bogged down in committee meetings and multi-year plans, we were already 3 steps ahead, constantly adjusting our strategy based on real-time feedback." The Admiral's mouth opens and closes several times, but no sound comes out. He looks like a Piscean gasping for water on dry land. "Oh, and let's not forget about the power of disinformation," Chen adds with a mischievous grin. "We may have, shall we say, creatively interpreted some of the diplomatic options available to us." Jenkins nods enthusiastically. "Turns out, if you convince enough star systems that there's a massive space kraken heading their way, they're much more amenable to accepting protection from the friendly human fleet that just happens to be in the neighborhood." "Space kraken?" Zilvorp finally manages to sputter. "But that's brilliant," Chen suggests. "Unorthodox," Jenkins offers. "Cheating!" the Admiral roars, his composure finally shattering completely. "This is a mockery of the noble art of galactic warfare. You've turned a sophisticated military exercise into a decisive victory?" Jenkins finishes for him, her smile now positively radiant. The Admiral's retort is cut short by a sudden commotion from the central command station. A frantic technician is waving all 6 of their arms, trying to get everyone's attention. "Admiral! Admiral Zilvorp!" the technician calls out, their voice pitched high with excitement or terror. It's hard to tell which. "You need to see this immediately." With a final glare at the smirking human cadets, Zilvorp rushes back to the main display. The technician points a trembling appendage at the holographic readout. "Sir, according to the simulation, the war is over." A hush falls over the amphitheater, broken only by the sound of a Thoraxian observer fainting and hitting the floor with a soft splat. over, Zilvorp repeats, his voice barely above a whisper. But how? We're barely into the third simulated year. The technician's voice quavers as they respond. The human forces have achieved total galactic domination, sir. Every major strategic objective has been secured. All opposing factions have either been neutralized or have surrendered unconditionally. The simulation, it doesn't know what to do next. It's never ended this quickly before. As if to punctuate this statement, the main holographic display flickers and dies, plunging the amphitheatre into an eerie half-light. In the ensuing silence, you could hear a minuscule quark moth's wings flutter. And then, from the back of the room, comes the unmistakable sound of slow, sarcastic clapping. All eyes turn to see Cadet Jenkins, standing atop her console, a look of pure, unadulterated glee on her face. "Well, folks," she announces, her voice carrying easily in the stunned silence. "I guess that's what you call a speed run in galactic warfare terms. Anyone up for another round? We've got plenty of time left in the day." The amphitheatre erupts into pandemonium. Alien commanders argue vociferously with each other and with the simulation technicians. Observers buzz and chitter in a mixture of languages, creating a cacophony that threatens to shake the very foundations of the building. Admiral Zilvorp, his scales now a mottled patchwork of conflicting colours, stumbles towards the human station like a sleepwalker. His eye stalks droop in defeat as he addresses the grinning cadets. "How?" he asks, simply, his voice barely audible above the din. "How did you do it?" Cadet Chen, his expression softening slightly at the sight of the dejected admiral, decides to take pity on him. "Well, sir, it's quite simple, really. We applied a little something we like to call combined arms warfare on a galactic scale." "Combined arms?" Zilvorp repeats, clearly unfamiliar with the term. Jenkins nods enthusiastically. "Exactly. Instead of treating each aspect of warfare as a separate entity, we integrated everything. Space combat, ground operations, cyber warfare, economic manipulation, and psychological operations, adhesive strategy." "But that's not how it's done," the Admiral protests weakly. "Galactic warfare is supposed to be a genteel affair, with clearly defined roles, and—" Chen cuts him off with a gentle but firm tone. "Admiral, with all due respect, that kind of thinking is exactly why your simulation was so easily overcome. In real conflict, there are no rules except survival and victory." "We also noticed," Jenkins adds, her tone a mixture of amusement and exasperation, "that your simulation had some rather, let's say, optimistic assumptions about how various species would react to existential threats." Zilvorp's eye stalks perk up slightly, curiosity overcoming his despair. "What do you mean?" Chen grins. "Well, for starters, your model assumed that most species, when faced with overwhelming force, would valiantly fight to the last individual. In reality, or at least in human experience, most rational beings prefer survival over glorious annihilation." "So we gave them a choice," Jenkins continues. "Join us and prosper, or resist and, well, let's just say the alternatives were less pleasant. You'd be amazed how quickly most star systems came around to our way of thinking." The Admiral's scales flush a deep blue, the Xyrillian equivalent of a blush. But that's diplomacy. This was supposed to be a war simulation." Both human cadets burst into laughter, a sound that causes nearby aliens to flinch involuntarily. "Oh, Admiral," Jenkins manages between chuckles, "haven't you ever heard the human saying, 'War is diplomacy by other means'? Or was it the other way around? Either way, the point stands." Chen, nods sagely. In human history, the line between warfare and diplomacy has always been, shall we say, flexible. We simply applied that flexibility on a galactic scale. Admiral Zilvorp's eye stalks droop even further, if that were possible. He looks like a deflated balloon animal at this point. But what about the noble traditions of galactic conflict? The heroic last stands? The generations-long sieges of fortress worlds? Jenkins pats the Admiral on what she assumes is his shoulder. It's hard to tell with Zerillian anatomy. I hate to break it to you, sir, but those noble traditions are a luxury of species that have never faced true existential threats. We humans, well, let's just say we've had to be a bit more pragmatic in our approach to survival. As if on cue, a loud crash echoes through the amphitheatre. All eyes, and various other sensory organs, turn to see a Gorgalax representative, all 27 of its tentacles flailing in agitation, upending its command console. "This is an outrage," the Gorgalax bellows, its voice modulator straining to translate its multi-tonal screeches. These primates have made a mockery of our sacred art of war. I demand a restart, with the humans excluded." A chorus of agreement rises from various corners of the room, punctuated by the occasional thud of an alien appendage being slammed against a surface in frustration. Admiral Zilvorp, seemingly snapped out of his daze by the commotion, draws himself up to his full height, which, to be fair, is still only about chest level to the human cadets. Now, he begins, his voice wavering slightly. "Let's not be hasty. The humans' methods may be unorthodox, but they are technically within the rules of the simulation." "Technically?" the Gorgalax representative screeches, its tentacles now tied in knots from sheer frustration. "They completed a 10-year simulation in less than an hour. That's not unorthodox. That's impossible." Cadet Chen clears his throat, drawing attention back to the human station. "If I may, Admiral," he begins, his tone surprisingly respectful given the circumstances, "I believe I can explain our efficiency." The Admiral nods wearily, gesturing for Chen to continue. "You see," Chen says, addressing not just the Admiral, but the entire amphitheatre. "Humans have a unique perspective when it comes to conflict. Our history is filled with wars that were supposed to be over in weeks, but lasted years, and blitzkriegs that brought mighty empires to their knees in days. We've learned, often the hard way, that the duration of a conflict has little to do with its scale." Jenkins picks up the thread. "Moreover, we come from a death world. Our entire existence has been a constant battle against our environment, against predators that would make your fiercest warriors wet themselves in terror." A collective shudder runs through the alien audience at this vivid and slightly damp imagery. "And against each other?" Jenkins continues, unperturbed. "We've had to evolve to think faster, adapt quicker, and fight smarter than any predator or rival. When we applied that mindset to your simulation, well, you saw the results." A thoughtful murmur ripples through the crowd. Even the Gorgalax representative's tentacles have unknotted themselves, now waving in what might be interpreted as grudging interest. Admiral Zilvorp's eye stalks swivel rapidly, taking in the changing mood of the amphitheatre. His scales shift to a more neutral hue as he processes this new perspective. I believe I'm beginning to understand," he says slowly. "Your species' unique evolutionary path has given you a different approach to conflict resolution. An approach that our simulation, based on millennia of galactic warfare traditions, was ill-equipped to handle." "Precisely," Chen exclaims, a hint of excitement creeping into his voice. "But, Admiral, don't you see? This isn't a failure of your simulation. It's an opportunity." The Admiral's eye stalks perk up in curiosity. An opportunity? How so? Jenkins grins, catching onto Chen's train of thought. Think about it, sir. Your simulation just encountered a completely novel approach to galactic warfare, one that none of your traditional models could have predicted. Isn't that exactly what these war games are supposed to prepare you for? A ripple of excited chittering spreads through the alien observers. Even some of the other team commanders are nodding their head analogues in reluctant agreement. She's right, you know, a gravelly voice pipes up from the back. All eyes turn to see Commander Zakthar, the notoriously crusty arachnoid strategist, scuttling forward. We've been running these simulations the same way for centuries, always getting the same results. It's about time someone shook things up. Admiral Zelvorp's scales begin to shimmer with a mix of colours that the human cadets interpret as a sign of intense thought. After a moment that seems to stretch into eternity, he speaks. You know, he says slowly, his voice gaining strength with each word. I believe you Deathworlders might be onto something. Perhaps it's time we... What's that charming human phrase? Ah, yes, think outside the box. A cheer goes up from the human cadets, quickly joined by a growing number of alien observers, and even some of the other team commanders. The Gorgalak's representatives' tentacles are now waving in what could only be described as enthusiastic agreement, or possibly a mating dance, it's hard to tell with Gorgalaks. In light of these unexpected developments, Admiral Zilvorp announces, his voice booming across the now hushed amphitheatre, I propose we use the remaining time to run a series of shorter simulations, each one designed to test different aspects of this new human-style warfare. Who knows? We might all learn something new. The proposal is met with a roar of approval that threatens to shake the very foundations of the building. As the various teams begin to excitedly discuss potential scenarios, Admiral Zilvorp turns back to the human cadets. Well, Cadets Jenkins and Chen, he says, his tone a mixture of resignation and grudging respect. It seems you've managed to turn our entire galactic warfare doctrine on its head in less than an hour. I don't know whether to court-martial you or pin medals on your chests. Jenkins grins cheekily. Why choose, Admiral? On Earth we have a long and storied tradition of rewarding our most creatively insubordinate officers. Just ask Cadet Chen here about Admiral Nelson. Chen nods enthusiastically. Oh, yes, there was this one time at the Battle of Copenhagen. Perhaps another time, the Admiral interrupts hastily, having quickly learned that human historical anecdotes tend to be alarmingly violent. For now, I believe we have some simulations to run. Are you two up for the challenge? The human cadets exchange a look that can only be described as the cat that got the cream, the canary, and the keys to the pet shop. Admiral, Jenkins says, cracking her knuckles in a way that makes several nearby aliens wince. We thought you'd never ask. And so, as the Galactic Confederation's annual war games descended into a chaotic but undeniably educational series of rapid-fire simulations, one thing became abundantly clear to all present. The galaxy would never be the same again. The era of genteel, predictable galactic warfare was over. The age of the Deathworlder had begun. In the days and weeks that followed, news of the humans' performance spread like wildfire across the galactic information networks. Reactions ranged from outright panic to begrudging admiration, with more than a few species suddenly very eager to establish diplomatic relations with this upstart Deathworld species. As for Cadets Jenkins and Chen, well, let's just say their performance didn't go unnoticed by Earth's military brass. Rumour has it they're being fast-tracked for command positions in humanity's first official interstellar fleet. After all, someone needs to be out there, keeping the galaxy on its toes, or tentacles, or pseudopods, or whatever appendages it happens to have. And Admiral Zilvorp. He's reportedly taken an extended sabbatical to study human military history. His latest communique to the Galactic High Command was a bit concerning. Something about this chap Napoleon and fascinating Earth creature called the honey badger. The general consensus is that it's probably best not to ask for clarification. In the end, as the dust settled and the galaxy adjusted to this new paradigm of warfare, one human saying seemed particularly apt. In the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity. And if there's one thing humans excel at, it's creating chaos and seizing opportunities. The galaxy, it seems, had better buckle up. The Deathworlders have arrived, and they're just getting started.